Hi, and welcome. I'm Dr. Keith Merron. This is Tim Kelley, and this is our fourth in a series of now, I think an unlimited series. We don't know. We have 7 or 8 planned,
Hard to say.
but we
If
will,
society keeps evolving, it's going to keep giving us more stuff to talk about.
it's true. So this is our fourth in a series. The series is Men Power and the Search for a Healthy Masculine. And what inspired this exploration right from the get-go was Tim and I, 25 years ago, riffing on the topic, wondering about what's emerging in society. And since then, we've done all kinds of cool things, including developed a workshop that we'll share with you a little bit about later.
Created a whole men's tribe, just all sorts of wackiness.
Yeah. So this topic for today is, we've titled it Male Power in Today's Society, but after back and forthing a little bit on it, it's really how society views men having and using power. How does society wield what is society's view of men and the way in which they wield power? And I'm the interview, and other times Tim will be interviewing me. I'm interviewing Tim because he has a lot of passion about this subject. So before we define anything, I'm curious what has you, Tim, so passionate about how society views men? What, why?
Well, we've talked about how society views men before. I interviewed you about that one. That was
Yeah,
fascinating.
yeah,
This is how society views men having and wielding power.
yes. And what
Um,
is it about that that's so?
well, let me say that I think those views have evolved a lot in just the last 50 to 70 years. Um, and I don't want to get too far into it, but I think that society tends to behave in very simplified ways, in a way like in the aggregate, and that uh, men and in some ways have earned the short end of the stick on this topic, and other ways are being given the short end of the stick whether they've earned it or not.
Yeah,
Um, and there's a lot of there's a lot to unpack here. Let me just say that, and it doesn't get talked about in a clear, rational way very much. It
yeah,
gets shouted about,
yes,
but there's very little actual unpacking and conversation and looking at what's really going on here.
yeah,
I think to the detriment of individual men and to the detriment of society.
yeah. Well, it sounds like the topic matters partly because your work helped bring greater health to the world, as is mine, and so this
Well, and also my work with canceled leaders who are at the effect of this sort of thing as well.
the short end of the stick part of the equation, I suspect, is what
Yep.
you will
Some
probably
sometimes well deserved, sometimes not.
got it.
So, yeah.
Got it. All right. Well, good. So you said I don't want to get into too much, but let's get into it a little bit. You said
Right.
it's been changing.
Mhm.
We could go with what's crazy now and what's hard now, but give me a little bit of sense of what you sense has been changed over time about society's views.
Yeah. So it's pretty agreed upon that if you roll time back 50, 100 years, somewhere in there, you get to a period of time when men basically had all the power. There were exceptions, and we celebrate those exceptions looking back at history. Um, but they were exceptions.
Yeah, yeah,
um, and to the benefit of women, to the benefit of men, to the benefit of society, that's changed. That now there's way more opportunity for women to wield and express power and be in positions of power. And we're talking here, I think, let's agree on this now, about biological sex. We're talking about biological males and biological females. There's a whole other topic one
yeah,
could get into about trans people and non-binary people and what happens when they wield power. You and I aren't particularly qualified, at least I'm not qualified to talk about that. And I think that has its own whole set of issues that are even more complicated than what
yeah.
we're talking about. And
Well, to the
so
point where we could say pretty safely, even this topic is evolving as we speak, but we're gonna
as the definition of male in the context of gender is evolving, this whole topic is evolving.
absolutely.
But just to simplify it and keep it within a range where you and I can speak with some authority,
Yeah.
and clarity. Let's say we're dealing with biological males for now.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And do me one more thing
yeah.
though, as we're defining terms here. I remember you defined power. What we were talking about power, what does it mean? And
Mhm.
you being having a very strong technology background and engineering background said, well,
Mhm.
power is, and then something came out of your mouth that was quite simple and
That's right.
elegant.
It's a physics thing.
So power is,
It's force times distance. And so actually no, force times distance divided by time.
yeah,
Excuse me. So the further you move something in the shorter period of time that it takes to move it, you've used more power, right?
got it.
So in a very literal sense, power is the ability to move things.
Yeah, yeah,
And more power allows you to move heavier things more quickly,
yeah.
right? And that works both literally and metaphorically, in my
Yeah.
view.
And the reason why I bring that up and why I think it's relevant to help shape or frame the topic we're in is that, at least in my mind, power is a pretty neutral concept.
We're taking a neutral stance on it in part because society doesn't.
Yes.
And I
Well,
think that's part of what is going to illustrate and elicit this whole topic is us looking neutrally at a relationship between society and power that is anything but neutral.
yes. Yes. Yeah. So we start with the starting point of power is a valuable thing. We all, at
If you want to
some
move
point,
stuff, you need power.
and move people is usually
If
the
you want to
realm
move
of
people,
power.
if you want to move events, if you want to move organizations, if you want to move society, I know a lot of folks who, and I'm one of them, who want to change the world. Good. You need to accumulate some power if you're going to change the world,
Right.
right? You need to have sufficient power to cause the change that you want to see happen.
Yeah. I notice this is important because a lot of people have an allergic reaction to the term power.
Well, this is what we're going to be talking about is
Good.
precisely this allergic reaction,
Okay.
right?
Well, then let's get more into it. So you're saying a long time ago, it
Yeah.
was
Not
not
that long, but men had the
50,
power.
100 years ago.
So now things have moved, right? There's way more opportunity now. Is it equal? No, it's not, right? If you look at the number of men and the higher you go in the food chain, the greater the ratio of males to females. If you look at people graduating from college, it's more females than males. But if
Yeah.
you look at like the Fortune 100, it's a very different story, right? Now, some of that is inequities built into the system. Some of that is simply time, right? When you say in the Navy, it's like, okay, now women can be admirals in combat positions. Well, it takes 30 years to grow an admiral, right?
Yeah.
From someone coming out of the Naval Academy or ROTC. It doesn't happen overnight. There's a long lag while people develop the necessary skills to even be able to compete for a position like that. So there's all sorts of reason for this, and we don't need to get into all that. Is it fair? No, it's not. Is it equal? No, it's not. But that's not the topic for today.
Yeah.
The topic for today is, and how does society view men holding and wielding power right now, today? And that's where that allergic reaction thing that you just talked about quite rightly comes up.
Great. So there's the question.
There's the
In
question. And
your view, how do you see it?
so it depends on who we're talking about and where we're talking about in the political spectrum. But let's look at sort of center and then to the left of center. And the way I say it is power is a four-letter word to a lot of these folks, right? That
Mhm.
power, actually, just the term power by itself has a negative connotation.
Mm.
Not if you're talking about plugging your laptop into the wall or plugging your Prius, or your plug-in hybrid or your electric car in, then power is a good thing. But if we're talking about people having power, there's a deep suspicion about it. Now, that deep suspicion isn't new. The people who founded the United States of America had a deep suspicion of power.
Mhm.
And there's a big lag between the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, during which there was really no executive government. And it was a mess because they refused to give anyone sufficient power to actually operate a government.
Yes.
And then after like years of that, they realized, well, this is absolutely not going to work. Okay, I guess we need a president. But, and then they put it on all these caveats and checks and balances to make sure that this person didn't abuse his, because then it was all
Yeah.
men, his power, right? And so, in a way, we're kind of back to that. We're back to this deep suspicion of hierarchical authority, and particularly hierarchical authority wielded by males.
Mhm.
And we see this in the media in advertising, in movies, where the depictions of men who have a lot of power are almost always depictions of basically sociopaths,
Yeah.
right? It's very rare to see in film, for example, here's this head of this huge corporation, and what a great guy, right? And he,
Yeah.
walks little old ladies across the street and loves puppies and makes sure that his corporation does things ethically. When is this ever depicted? Right?
There's very rarely are there healthy. I mean, I'd have to go back a long time before I could find 50, 75, 100 years ago before I could find where the men in positions of power were shown to be, whether you agree with it or not,
Right, it's
benevolent.
back to the fathers knows best thing in the 1950s, and
Right.
we have to trust the president knows what's best for the country and this whole thing prior to the Vietnam War,
Yeah.
right?
Whether
So
you agree with it, it was still a fairly positive image.
that's right. That's right. And did these leaders always live up to that? No, they didn't. But now there's an assumption that
Yeah.
they're all going to be unethical with that power. Not necessarily the women, but absolutely the men.
And you're holding the perspective that that assumption is particularly resident in center to the left, not
Center
as
and left.
resident in the
We'll
right.
get to the right in a moment. But
Okay.
I just want to say that on the left, they often see it as their job to resist the people who have that power. And you get phrases like speak truth to power,
Yeah.
which, by the way, I hate the phrase speak truth to power. I understand why people say it, but it's got all these limiting beliefs built into it, right?
Oh, it does. Yeah.
That
Yeah.
the powerful are not truthful and the truthful have no power, right? So they're the ones with the power and they're all liars because we have to speak truth. Like it's just, and I can't have power in that scenario because then I become one of them, you know?
Yeah.
So I have to be out here resisting. So
Yeah. Yeah. Why do you suppose it emerged that there has been among a fairly large group of people an allergic reaction to power? Why is that?
So some of it makes sense. I mean, if you look at how the Vietnam War started and how it was conducted, in the Pentagon Papers and all of that, and then the Iraq War too, or the second Iraq War, right? That a lot of it was now. I think George W. Bush really believed that there were WMDs in Iraq, but nonetheless, the war was founded on false pretenses,
Yeah.
right? And so we've got a series of and Nixon, right? A series of abuse of power incidents by men using power, um, not disclosing what was really going on, and putting forth a benign narrative to cover up some stuff that was absolutely not benign at all. Um, and part of it is society maturing and saying, well, wait a minute, or this is not a parent-child relationship in the way it was before, right? We're not just going to trust you to know what's good for us. And it's sort of like society has grown up from being a child to being an adolescent.
Yeah.
And now there's this teenage kind of that's coming back at the powerful. The other sort of meta psychological thing is the development of the green meme in spiral dynamics, right? The very psychological impulse that has people want to protect the earth and help disenfranchised communities like indigenous communities and trans people and all these other things. That same impulse that wants to right these wrongs and correct these inequalities and create a better world has a strong anti-authoritarian streak to it
Yeah.
that is itself suspicious of power.
I think that's where I would have landed if you had asked me the same question. I think you're on stronger ground around the left is more known for let's address these inequities. They're
Mhm.
socially constructed, they're baked in, they're structural now, and we need to do things to equal the playing field. And
Well, that other stuff was important. If you recall, you and I are old enough, we were around that, right? That there was a loss of innocence associated and a breach of trust associated with the Vietnam War and with Watergate. That has
well,
never healed.
well, well, I think that's true. The thing that I want to be careful of, at least historically, it was Kennedy's administration, a
Oh,
Democrat
absolutely.
who
And
primarily drove that forward, and then
with all
Johnson,
sorts of weirdness going on with the
all
CIA
kind
and
of
rigging
weirdness.
elections and all kind of stuff like that. And Johnson perpetuated a bunch of it and was talking about winning publicly while in private, saying, "Oh boy, we're screwed," you know.
Yeah,
So it was a series of administrations that were all complicit in that, for sure,
yeah, yeah. So
culminating with Nixon, the end of the Vietnam War, and Watergate, all to just put a
yeah.
cherry on top of it. So,
Yeah, I think it's more, and we'll get to what the implications are in just a minute, but I think it's Democrats and Republicans alike in positions of power wield power in ways that are sometimes cruel, unfair, imbalanced, etc.
well, there's a great article in the Atlantic a couple of years ago that talks about what it does to people's brains when you leave them in power too long.
Yes. Yeah.
That people kind of become sort of sociopathic light, narcissistic, if you leave them in power long enough. And so anyone, regardless of political stripe, left in power for a great enough period, well, not anyone, nearly anyone, left in power for a long enough period of time becomes narcissistic and untrustworthy with that power. They lose their capacity to empathize with the people at the effect of the decisions that they're making.
I think that's exactly right. And in some sense, the people in positions of power are already driven by a need for power, and so
Right. They're
their
a
ambition,
little sort of narcissistic adjacent in the first place, or they wouldn't be going into that profession.
yeah.
So,
So they're climbing the ladder in hopes to gain
yep,
more and more power. And
that's
I'm
right.
saying the left and the right do the same.
Absolutely, for
Yeah.
sure. So
And
let's talk about the right's relationship to power a little bit. So um, this is the way I like to think about it, is that the society has a love-hate relationship with male power, and the right is the love side of that relationship. And we're
mhm,
seeing it now. Now, it's interesting because within the American right, we have two deeply conflicting forces. One is the whole libertarian movement, which shows up primarily on the right side of the political spectrum, which is, if anything, more deeply suspicious of executive power than the progressive left.
yes,
And the religious and social conservatives, who are the ones having the love affair with power, particularly with men wielding power.
yes,
And this desire now in the United States, very openly, you interview people and they say, well, we need a strong man in the White House like this. We need someone powerful. We need someone strong. You know, and you know, for people, students of history, the term strongman has a lot of connotations that either these people are unaware of, or they're saying that that's exactly what they want.
yeah,
Um, and therein lies this desire in a confusing, in my view, in a confusing, changing, uncertain world with large forces moving around that are for sure going to have an impact on us,
hmm,
right? Changes in demographics, changes in climate, all these sorts of things, and with things seeming increasingly out of control, the idea of someone who has sufficient power to protect me starts becoming very, very appealing.
which I think is some of the reason I don't want to get into Trump much, but it's one
Mhm.
of the things that fueled Trump. He shows up as
Absolutely.
very powerful, very certain, even though he
Mhm.
changes his mind a lot, very certain, and that's appealing to a large
That's
percentage of the
right.
population, almost as if the parent-child relationship, the child in people are attracted to the parent in Trump, who was professing or offering,
I will protect you. I will make things the way they were before. I will make things,
yeah,
now it's uncertain and messed up. I'm going to make it the way it was and it'll be great. You'll see.
yeah, yeah,
Trust me.
yeah,
I
yeah,
can protect you. And those same people on the right seem to be drawn to Netanyahu and Orban and even Putin, and sort of kind of leaning in the direction of these powerful, strong male leaders who are promising to, not so much concerned for the rules. The rules get in the way of me doing what I need to do to keep you safe.
yeah. This
Um,
probably explains in part the strong rift that seems to be emerging. And you say confusion, I'd say it's confusion and rift. So
mhm.
part of it is that there's a large number of people who are kind of disgusted with the patriarchy and
Hmm.
see some of the damages done from within the patriarchy. And I'm
Right.
not a
And there's a
anti-patriarch.
reevaluation of history through this lens of
y-
saying, well, if we look at this from the eyes of instead of the eyes of the victors and the ones writing the history sitting in their palaces to the people at the effect of these decisions, then this history looks very different. What would they say about it? Which
Yeah,
is a very useful exercise, I think.
I think so too. So we have the folks that are questioning the fundamental power structures and the patriarchy, and the
Mhm.
others that go, no, it's perfectly fine and good and healthy,
In
and
fact, we need more of it.
we need better versions of it.
Right.
So that rift and that it's
Mhm.
almost as if we have not found a balance at all. We found the
Oh
tension
no,
point
nowhere close.
in
And so we
society,
have the love of the male power and the hate of the male power.
very
Um,
much resonant. So my question to you,
mhm.
to further the conversation a little bit, why does that, let's treat it as a valid perception
Sure.
of what's been going on. Why does that matter to you or to me or to anyone that might be listening?
Well, as you know, it matters to me because I'm trying to redesign society, and that's like one of the factors that needs to be taken into account. But let's bring it down to a personal level instead.
Little more personally, yeah.
Um, so what I see from that, so I have a 21-year-old son, as you know, and I
Yeah,
watch him watching all of this stuff going on and thinking about his own future. He's got pretty strong power drives, this kid.
he does.
Now, back in the 1950s, we would say, oh, look at that ambitious young man. Go get him, kid. Right?
Yeah,
Now it's a little different, right? Oh, look at this privileged young white male. And so he's gotten pushback on sports teams, in class, in college, sitting in a feminism class, being explained to it that it's all his fault, this sort of thing. Um, and he's only 21. He hasn't had enough time to screw up society. It's not
yeah,
really his fault.
yeah.
You can blame me if you want, but
We'll give him a chance for a while, but
it's a little soon
it's
for him,
more
right?
you and I and our
Given a
crowd.
chance, who knows? He might, but he hasn't yet.
Yeah,
so,
right.
so it's very interesting seeing him looking out with suspicion and concern at
Yeah,
this landscape as he tries to imagine himself acquiring money, acquiring power, getting a wife, trying to make something of himself in the world, and seeing all of these forces arrayed against him in a way that they were not arrayed against me.
yeah,
Um, and the whole historical thing and all that stuff, I think that's great, right? I mean, we need multiple narratives about what's happened,
yes,
and I think the left needs to be open to that. There's other narratives than theirs that might also be valid. Sometimes they get a little locked in on their narrative. Um, but that stuff's really healthy for us to evaluate who are we and how do we get here and how do we behave, and do we like or not like that we did this? Do we like or not like that? If we had to do Hiroshima and Nagasaki over again, would we drop the bombs or not? This is really good self-reflection for us to do as a society. Very, very healthy. The problem I have is the thing I named at the beginning, which is this dramatic oversimplification that seems to happen,
yes.
where on a collective level, we sound a little bit like 2-year-olds sometimes. Man, bad, whap, right? Male power, bad.
Hmm.
As opposed to an adult being able to look at something and say, well, it depends on which males and which kind of power we're talking about and what they're doing with it
How
and
it's
what the
being
impact
wielded.
is,
Yes,
right? And taking all the power away from all the men and giving it to all the women. If you look at some of the women who are trying to acquire power right now, it's a little scary. Like, is that an automatic solution? Probably not. Would it be better to have more women in power? Absolutely.
yeah, yeah,
But the idea that we have to take all the power away from all the men, this is one of those reactive, childlike solutions that will for sure not make things better and may have vast unintended consequences if it were possible to pull off, which fortunately is probably not.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. I
so, but as an individual male, and you and I see this in the Sword and Scepter workshop, it's like here I am trying to go and express my power in a world which has at best mixed feelings about that.
yeah, yeah.
Now what do I do? Do I show up with that power anyway? Do I need to modify how I'm doing it? what kind of response can I expect? And I'm prepared to deal with that response.
Yeah.
Or is it, do I just want to take my toys and go home? Well, I don't think that taking the toys and go home is a great way to spend this lifetime, right? There's things I need to do, and changes I want to create in the world, and stuff I want to manifest that require power. How do I navigate that? It's not as simple as it used to be.
I think that's right. I would add a couple things. Um, you're probably familiar with the distinction between inner directed and other directed. It
Hmm.
came out, uh, a sociologist by name of, I think, Howard Reisman, somebody Reisman, and others wrote a book um, in the 50s that described a foundational shift that was occurring, and it was away from the inner directed self to other directed.
Hmm.
And I think the social media uh, is very other directed, meaning you spend hours and hours a day watching social media and copying or following trends
Hmm.
without necessarily asking the question, what is true for me,
Or trying to show myself in a particular way in order to fit in with
in order to
these
fit in?
online narratives. And yeah.
I would say societal, we're creating more and more other directed human beings in a
Hmm.
confusing set of circumstances about which direction to go. And so,
And if I'm at risk of being canceled by the folks on the extreme left or the folks on the extreme right, if I say or do the wrong thing, that causes me, that fear of being cast out by the tribe is going to cause me to be even more outer directed.
right. So, what's the antidote? At least societally, we may explore some other time the antidote.
Hmm.
But personally, and this is, I think, the whole reason why the sword and scepter exists, why we created it, in part to help men find what's their truth.
Hmm.
What is true for me, independent of all these things out there, what seems congruent with who I am and who I want to be. That requires an inward journey into my own, finding my own inner compass in a world where that's harder and harder to do.
And unfortunately, it's not as simple as, okay, now I know my inner truth and I'm just going to go do it and everyone's going
No, of
to have
course
to
not.
deal with
No.
it, right? Because there's another polarity that people do a bad job of navigating, right? If I'm inner directed, then I can't care what anyone else thinks, which then results to an ineffective communication and manifestation of what matters most to me so that it's not accepted by other people. And now I feel rejected at something that's most fundamental and purposeful and meaningful to me.
Yeah.
So there's the combination of the inner truth, which has nothing to do with anyone but me, and then how I express and manifest that inner truth in the outer world, which has everything to do with
Yeah.
me and everybody else.
Yeah. There are two lovely concepts in Buddhism that marry. I don't even know if they're talked about as together, but I bring them together in my mind.
Hmm.
One concept is right mind or right thinking,
Hmm.
and the other is skillful means,
Or right action.
right action. Yeah.
Hmm.
And so you're speaking to both of those. Right mind meaning find your truth, find your inner compass, tune that to get clear, which I think is a lot of your purpose work is related to that.
Hmm.
And then once clear, then how do I express it in ways that are effective in the world?
Right.
That skillfulness is a necessary component. And it's skillful given a world that's very politically charged. How do I navigate that effectively? Those two parts seem critical to marry, to
Yep.
come together. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, I think we're close to the time that we had um, said, but you wanted to say something about canceled leaders, and I don't know if it's still relevant now. You've mentioned it, and I don't
I've
know that.
mentioned it a few times. Let me just say that there's a it's predominantly known cancel culture as a phenomenon of the left, but there's plenty of cancellation going on the right politically.
Yes, yeah, yeah,
Um, and this the idea is that there is an acceptable narrative, there's an acceptable interpretation of events, there's an acceptable set of objectives, and then if you do not conform to those, and by the way, what's acceptable is evolving rapidly.
yeah,
So even if you knew last year what was acceptable, it may have changed since then.
yes,
And so it frightens people. In some case, it frightens people into inaction
yeah,
in situations where action is required. and some of the people I'm working with who were taking action, were doing stuff, um, and were canceled, were thrown out by the collective for the things they said and did. Sometimes understandably so, like, secretly racist or misogynist or whatever writings or something that came to light, or you know, things about their past that got revealed that were not ego enhancing, whatever. But to me, it's very important, like this zero tolerance quality about
Yeah.
how things are being done is entirely inappropriate in a world that's evolving as quickly as ours.
Yeah, I'd say it's somewhat differently, but I feel that similarly that the immediate and so rapid rejection of another
Mm-hmm.
based on sparse information or clues or a word that they say, by God, I might say something sexist or racist right now. And
We
I
may have
wouldn't
offended people in this video.
left and right.
Yeah,
And yet those words come out of somebody's mouth. That doesn't mean that that's their
not their
fundamental
whole being. It's not
right.
their whole past and their whole
And it
future.
may be a cultural habit that they have, but
Yeah.
because it's so bad, wrong, shouldn't around
Mm-hmm.
society right and left are jumping on each other like
That's right.
crazy
Yeah.
and canceling each other so rapidly that what we're losing is openness, curiosity, and dialogue.
Yep.
That to me is the problem.
The very dialogue that would allow us to create agreed upon solutions to very challenging problems
Yeah,
instead of just slinging dung at one another.
can't be found while we're in
Yeah.
this.
So for
Um,
me, the task is to help these people find their way back into positions of power and to learn from the
yes,
event. Whether it was deserved or not doesn't matter. The path back looks pretty much the same, right?
yeah,
Like, were they guilty or not guilty of the thing they were accused of is actually a relatively minor factor in the whole thing. Because if you got canceled, it doesn't matter whether you're innocent or guilty. You're canceled. Now
yeah.
you have to deal with it. Now you
It
have to find your way back.
very tough to uh, claw your way out or climb your way out of the collective perception or belief. That
That's
belief
right.
carries on its own life.
Even if you're provably innocent, that may not solve the problem.
Yeah, yeah. Um, for another time and another place, but
Yep.
I want to put a plug in for Tim's work around
Thank
canceled
you.
leaders. It's a emerging body of work for him. Emerging
Canceledleader.com.
canceledleader.com.
Yeah.
You'll find some of Tim's perspective in this area, and I feel kind of complete. I think we've
Yeah.
talked a little bit. I'm
Hopefully we've offended someone.
I,
Wouldn't want it to be so bland that no one objected to any of it.
certainly agree. So thank you, Tim. I'm
Yeah.
glad to uh, glad to be the one interviewing you as you offer a lot. And I don't know what our subject will be next time, but it will be somewhere in the area of men power
It'll be interesting.
and search for the healthy masculine.
We'll continue to search for the healthy masculine.
All right. Super. All right. Take care, Tim.
Thanks.